G'day, my name's Ian Campbell from Fortem Australia. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. Fortem Australia are a charity, a national charity that work with first responders and their families, supporting those really important people in our community with their mental health and well-being. First responders are the people who protect and care for our community. Fortem Australia are the people that protect and care for those people. Joining our conversation this afternoon is Dom Hilbrink, one of our senior clinicians here at Fortem. Dom joins us from Sydney. How are you travelling, Dom, in Sydney? It's all happening there at the moment. How are you feeling?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. We're in lockdown at the moment, so not a lot changes for me in lockdown. My work sort of continues, and don't mind, the slowing down a bit. Just miss the social aspect of it.
And look, one of the perks that I think we've both had today, working from home, our daughter's bringing us cups of tea and scones as we work away. One of the perks of lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. If only they could do that all the time.
Dom, give us a sense of your background. You're a senior clinician at Fortem. What do you bring to Fortem Australia? Give us a sense of you and your background.
So my training's actually in social work. But I've worked as a therapist and primarily in the trauma space for the last 20 years. So I've worked, and a lot of that work has been with emergency services and the military. So service-related trauma and occupational trauma. And a lot of that work has been with obviously those who have been injured and suffered traumatic stress over the course of their work. So I've seen a lot of that side of things, and it's been great to have the opportunity to come into Fortem and kind of work on the other side of things with, sort of promoting and supporting the well-being and looking after first responders, so that hopefully, I don't see them in my other role down the track.
Dom, it's an article that you wrote for the Fortem Australia website this week that has us talking. It's generated a lot of comments on Fortem's social media channels. The headline of the article is "The Harder Courage, Going Beyond Your Comfort Zone." The idea for this article came from some of the feedback that you've picked up from participants in Fortem's wellbeing activities.
Yeah, so part of my role is to monitor the impact of the programs, including the wellbeing activities. And one of the things that was a pleasant surprise coming out of those was some of the comments and feedback that people were giving around things that they might do differently as a result of participating in the activities. This was a question that I wasn't sure would get much sort of value from our participants, but they kind of spontaneously started to speak to feeling inspired and sort of reinvigorated about their social connections, about being a bit more brave and going out of the comfort zone socially and reaching out and connecting to people. Which, it can be hard for all of us to do that, but particularly for those who are trained to, kind of be stoic and armoured up and go out into dangerous situations.
The article's an interesting read because it talks about those different types of courage. And I guess first responders have that innate courage that sends them into a burning building, sends them into, the scene of a car crash, a car accident, sends them into those really dangerous situations. There's a courage that comes with being a first responder that's different to the sort of courage you talk about in the article. But let's start with that courage that a first responder innately has. Where does that courage come from that sends a first responder running into danger?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's one that for those of us who don't do that, may be hard to relate to. And we'll often say things like, it's heroic and these people are heroes. And most of the first responders that I've worked with don't like that language. They don't like being called heroes, and they'll, and there's been times when I've worked with people on specific situations and genuinely been in awe of what people have done and the lengths they'll go to protect the community and things like that. But they'll inevitably just say, I was just doing my job. So,
yeah.
I think there's a sense, it's really just a sense of calling that these folks, feel a sense of duty and a desire to serve the community. But that there's also, a kind of personal drive that motivates people to do this sort of work. And it's similar, I often think it's similar to elite sports people in a lot of ways. They push through the usual barriers of discomfort in order to operate at a certain level in certain environments. And that's that's what we think of heroic, but to them it just becomes normal.
That rush of adrenaline has got to help with that courage too, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. The training and the experience that people get in the work helps them to to really keep their heads and to function quite effectively and efficiently in these high stress environments, and that can actually feel good. A lot of people in these roles, they can talk about that's when they feel in the zone, and that's much more comfortable, and it's what they're tuned to, and sometimes it's slowing down that can actually be harder.
And your article actually calls on first responders, calls on all of us to, I guess, summon that different courage to go beyond your comfort zone, to step up in a different way. First responders step up to respond in those times of crisis. Your article calls on first responders and those around them to step up in a different way. Help us understand the sort of different courage that you're trying to inspire in people who read your article.
So it's really just about being more real and more yourself with the people that matter. And that's really, in its simplest form, is just about being around and being around for the important stuff, and sharing the joy and the pain and everything in between. And that's theirs and yours.
But being vulnerable,
yeah, the V word that a lot of these folks don't like. Yeah.
Why is it so hard for us to go there when you think of what first responders do day to day? And we're all in this. It's not just first responders who struggle to be vulnerable. Why is it so hard for us humans to be vulnerable, to display those sort of emotions?
Well, and this is where it gets funny, because a lot of the people that I work with say to me, "Oh, gee, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you talk about trauma and talk about feelings and process pain and grief and anxiety and all of that sort of stuff every day." And that I kind of feel like that's weird coming from people who go out and face real threat and real aggression and horror and all sorts of things every day. But they're used to that, and I'm used to sort of working with emotions and things like that. So, but for most of us, being vulnerable feels more risky.
Yeah.
If when we open up to people and start to show more of our real selves, we can be misunderstood, we can be judged, we can be rejected, and that stuff hurts. It brings up shame, and shame's one of those things that we all avoid like the plague. It's not a fun feeling, and for a lot of these folks, it's easier to go out and be tough and face threats and things like that than to face those other sort of more social threats and that sort of risky stuff.
What are the benefits? Given the risks that you've just outlined, Dom, sell us the benefits for being vulnerable, for opening ourselves up to this.
Well, I think in simple terms, it's just a richer and more satisfying life. If you think about the things that people tend to regret or talk about regretting towards the end of their life, people don't say, "Oh, gee, I wish I'd spent less time with the family and done more work."
Yeah.
It's usually the opposite. And so there's lots of very successful people that can end up feeling, quite empty because that piece is missing. So, we're wired for social connection and belonging, and it's, whether we like it or not, or whether we want it to be or not, it's just the way that we're wired, and we feel like something's missing without it. And there's nothing that is satisfying in the same way as being connected, and being seen for who we truly are, and being accepted.
You don't need to wait till the end of your life to feel that, do you? It is a really human emotion that I think we can all relate to in our day-to-day life. How do we get over the nerves? How do we get over the fear we have? What are some of the tips and the tricks, or what are some of the things that might grease the wheels of us being more vulnerable, of opening that door?
I think I can answer that with 2 words, and it's make time. The first thing is just about sorting priorities and making that important. One of the downsides to that sense of duty and calling and commitment to the broader community is that it can start to pull our attention away from not only our immediate families, but from ourselves and making time for ourselves. So, the biggest thing is just about making time. And that's where, it's really encouraging to see some of the feedback from our Fortem activities, where that's what, coming along and doing sort of family activities or various other activities gives them a sense of. It reminds them of the joy and the pleasure in, just being around the people that are important. And in terms of, the V word and being vulnerable, it's, it's not about sort of opening ourselves up to everyone.
Yeah.
It's the important people, and it's just about small steps. We build trust and a sense of safety by, gradually opening up to people and connecting.
I reckon these crazy days of COVID are an opportunity to do this. You touched on it earlier when we were talking about, working from home and our daughters bringing us scones and cups of tea, and you talked about, slowing down. There's some opportunity here during these challenging times for us to find this time to connect more deeply with those important people.
Yeah, absolutely. When we first went into lockdown last year in Sydney, it was, I think, around the time of Easter, and I think we'd planned to go away or something like that. But we went into lockdown, and we ended up deciding that we'd go camping in our backyard. And honestly, it's one of the best Easters I've ever had. Just sort of getting the fire pit going down the back, having a tent set up on the yard, and just. My daughter was quite strict about, we're not allowed inside unless it's for the toilet or to get food, and get off your devices and yes, slowing down in that way and just sort of getting into a more natural rhythm is really good for us, and it's a great antidote to stress.
What's your advice, I guess, for creating that environment that allows for these sorts of relationships and these sorts of exchanges to happen? Does it come back to allowing the time, allowing for the space again?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, making time. But essentially, it's, vulnerability is uncomfortable. So it's about, how do I make it easier for someone to be uncomfortable? And, there's a few things that do that. And one thing is just to be a good listener, and just listen, and, not necessarily ask questions or draw people out, but allow space, when people do start to talk about things. And it's not about fixing anything or solving any problems, but just really listening.
Yeah, often there is that pressure to have an answer or to solve the problem, isn't there? But often that will emerge as you start talking.
That's right. And it's actually a relief. I think a lot of people, feel uncomfortable with other people's distress and vulnerability because there's that sense I've got to do something about it. But once we realize the best thing we can do is just be there and just listen, that's a real relief. So, a few other things that we can do is to, be vulnerable ourselves. The more real that we are, the more that sort of makes it safe for other people to be real as well. And that's really just allowing ourselves, on one level, just to be imperfect. We don't, none of us are perfect, and none of us have to be. And if that's the attitude that we sort of create in our lives and with our families, then we're making a space where it starts to feel safe to be more vulnerable. And then, I like to think of, I think, when people may struggle with vulnerability, sometimes we can, be too forceful in trying to draw them out, which just has, the reverse effect of what.
Yeah. Talk to me, damn it.
Yeah. And so, I like to sort of think that it's better to be understanding twice as much as we are challenging or demanding. So understanding that it may be hard to open up and be vulnerable or be connected. But these connections, it doesn't have to be that deep and meaningful stuff. It can be, we can build strong bonds and connections through goofing around and, having a laugh, telling stories, reminiscing. Those are kind of safer and less risky ways of sort of starting to be vulnerable and build those connections.
Some great ideas for the weekend there, Dom. And here we are, a couple of fellas hanging around talking about being vulnerable. We've started the conversation here this afternoon, Dom, and I guess the invitation is there for others to pick up the conversation over the weekend as well. Fortem Australia is here to look after the mental health and wellbeing of our first responder community. You'll find a range of resources and assets on the Fortem Australia website, including the article that we've just been talking about. I'll include a link to the article in the post with this video. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Dom. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Pleasure. Thanks.